So just as a reminder, after this this interview with Andy, we're going to do the community piece of this, and we're going to ask each of the communities to come up and talk for 3 or 4 minutes, someone from that community, just to tell us what your big issues are. We're going to go alphabetically, so if you're in Wisconsin, you might know what that means. And we'll see if we can figure out the alphabetizing as we go forward. And then we're going to open it up to some of our other thought leaders in the room to share some thoughts and try to get a little more interactive. I recognize that you had a big lunch and you're in a room without windows, so enjoy the holiday trees to get your endorphins going out there. And I'm very pleased that our third interview today is with an old friend of mine. Been friends a long time at least, Andy Levine. And Andy runs a company called DCI in New York, and I'm gonna let him tell you what that is first, because it's a little bit interesting to communities. So you've been doing this most of your adult life, right?
Sure. So my dad started DCI. It stands for Development Counselors International, and we do nothing but marketplaces. Sorry?
Can we hear? In the back, Carly? A little bit higher.
I'm just going to hold this. So we do nothing but marketplaces. We work for cities, states, regions, and countries in both economic development marketing and tourism marketing. So my dad started this company in 1960. I was born in 1961, so I can literally say I've been in it since birth.
Fair enough. And you've been president of the company for 20 years?
I joined the company in 1991, and I rose to president in 3 years.
Okay, that's
quite
good.
Amazing.
Family businesses are good, aren't they? Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's because Ted, I knew the company first with his father, and that's because he wanted to retire.
That's pretty much right.
Yes.
Good. Good for me, anyway.
So what are the best places, what are the most fun places you're working, and what are the most challenging places?
So we work, all over the world. Our clients internationally range from Peru to Thailand to Tasmania. So it's a pretty wide swath of stuff. And then domestically, we work with a number of states. We work with a large number of cities, and some are very big cities, like Denver, Charleston, Phoenix. Some are very small cities, or smaller cities that certainly would fit into the micropolitan model that we have here today.
So what same question for the others. What's the most interesting thing you're working on these days?
Okay. I took some notes and
I sent Andy the questions ahead of time also, so
There are 4 things that I thought would be interesting before this group, and just to talk about them quickly. Number 1 was the rise of, and my focus is really on marketing, so that's where a lot of my expertise is. Unlike the previous presenters, I do not have a book, but I still hope you'll think I'm intelligent, perhaps. But there were 4 things that came to mind, in really, once again, more the marketing sphere. One was the rise of what I call the digital ambassadors. So if we go back 20, 30 years, people were organized as ambassadors for communities, and they would, basically the idea is they would get trained and they'd go out and talk about what was good about going on in their community and sort of spread the word about this. So that has changed now today with what I would call the rise of the digital ambassadors, individuals who use their Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter accounts to say positive things about the communities that they're working with. It's a very, very interesting program for micropolitan communities. I think it can be really adapted exceptionally well, and actually works better in a smaller community than a large community. So that was number 1. Number 2 is the rise of talent attraction. So I think it was Alan talked a little about workforce development and having 50 different groups within a community trying to focus on that. And I must confess, I see varying degrees of success around the country as I look at workforce development programs. And I think people are getting to a point now, particularly companies within communities, they're kind of like, listen, I want to grow here. I want to grow in this community, but I can't find the people to grow. So if you can't get those people for me, if I can't find them here, I'm going to grow somewhere else. So it's led some groups to really focus in on talent attraction. So it's not a grow your own kind of thing. It's how can we bring in people from the outside who have the skill sets that our company needs. So talent attraction is a trend I'm seeing. This might be a little bit limited to the economic development group here, but I'm seeing a transition of economic development websites. In the past, a good economic development website has been about information. And I'm going to put all the information I can here that will help a company make a decision. To me, a good economic development website today is about lead generation. So I'm going to put information that is going to cause people to raise up their hand and say, can you send me that report you promised me? Or can you include me in something that then identifies that they're interested in your community? Or you can identify them via their publicly available IP address, same way that Amazon identifies what you've been looking at and what you've been doing, or an airline identifies that you're looking for a cheap seat to Buffalo, New York, and you can basically see who is visiting your website without them, knowing about it or without them self-identifying. That was number 3. The last thing that I'm involved in, there's just a lot of fun, and I'll share with you here, is I've really gotten into podcasting in the past year. I launched a podcast called The Project, Inside Corporate Location Decisions. And every 2 weeks, me and one of my colleagues at the office, we interview a company that has made a location decision. And we ask them why they made that decision. We also interview usually the economic development professional, sometimes a mayor, sometimes a site selection consultant, but we sort of unravel the pieces of why they made that location decision. So those are the 4 things that I'm doing that are interesting. Now, as I talk about it, I got a pretty interesting life right now, so this is a good thing.
So I listen to Game of Thrones podcast. Do you have that many listeners on yours, or is it
somewhat less?
Less, okay, less than Game of Thrones.
A really good episode will get 500 people listening to it.
Okay. So I asked Andy what I should ask him today, and he specifically asked me to ask him if he was the smartest marketer in the room. Are you the smartest marketer in this room?
Well, I kind of wish I had gone first, because after hearing from Bill, after hearing from Alan, I kind of feel like a high school C student that accidentally got caught in advanced algebra class. As I said, I don't have a book. I tend to try to take themes and simplify them as much as I can.
You have a report, though, right? You brought a report with you? I saw you in a big thing.
I just have it right here, yes. This is something I think we'll talk about in a little bit called Talent Wars, in which we surveyed 1,000 people and asked them why they would consider relocating somewhere, what goes through their mind as they consider relocation and that sort of thing.
Okay, I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
So, some people market communities, some people brand communities. Can you help me understand what you see as the difference?
Yeah. So the simple way to think of this is sort of branding first, marketing second. So branding is about how we want our community to be perceived, sort of what's our story, what differentiates us, what makes us different. So branding is figuring out the story. Branding is really like the strategy. Marketing is tactical. How do we get people to understand that story, or how do we communicate that story to whatever our target audiences might be? That might be talent that we're trying to attract, that might be visitors that we're trying to bring here, and that might be companies that we're trying to get to invest here.
So you wrote something once, I think, that was entitled "The Calf Rarely Brands Itself." Did I get that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So as a community, I want to go out and tell everybody that how wonderful I am and make my brand exactly what I want to make it. Can I do that?
So the calf rarely brands itself. What that means is you can't rely on an economic development organization to tell the story. You can't even rely on the mayor to tell that story, or the city council. What you really do is have to rely on credible third parties to tell that story. So what are credible third parties within a community? Well, corporate leadership certainly is, if you're trying to attract investment. If you're trying to attract visitors, it's past visitors. If you're trying to attract talent, it's people who've already made the move to that community and are very happy within the community. So that's one group. The other group are the national media or the international media, or people within a particular sector. If you're trying, I was speaking to someone who talked about the wood products industry that they were trying to attract to their community. Getting someone from Wood Products News to write a good story about your community could be very powerful for that community. So it's industry leaders, it's credible third parties that can say good things about your community. So I sometimes call what a lot of economic development groups do chest beating. And it's not as credible as a corporate executive in the community, someone who's moved there recently, or an outsider that comes in and says, gee, there's something really interesting going on in this community.
So Bill talked about sort of the change that's happened in media, that people read the media that reinforces their thought process. And when I first started dealing with DCI, you were helping us put specific articles into specific media outlets by working reporters or coming up with ideas. Does that all still work? And the reporters still do that?
It's interesting. So within, if you're trying to attract investment to community, it still works remarkably well. Because think about this for a moment. Who are making most corporate location decisions? They tend to be white males in their 50s and 60s. What do they read every morning? They read the Wall Street Journal. That's still the way they get their news. So with that audience, it's working, still working pretty well. It's going to decrease over time as newspapers are becoming less and less important. But with that audience, it still is very, very powerful. If you're talking about talent attraction and you're sort of focusing on millennials, everything I read and the data that we've collected here suggests that they don't trust the news media. And so they are getting their information about a community from other sources.
So those digital ambassadors is where...
The digital ambassadors, when we asked this group of 1,000 people, we asked where they got their information about a community. Number one was from people that I know, from friends and family and that sort of thing. Number two was word of mouth. If I'm friends with someone on Facebook or connected with someone on LinkedIn or I follow someone on Twitter, what they say about the community that they work in or live in is powerful to me.
So talk about talent wars. We've had the thread all day long that workforce, and I showed you a chart, workforce is ruling site selection decisions. Workforce is important for a community. Well, how does workforce make their decisions? That's a softball.
Okay, thank you. And it is a question you gave me there.
So even warmed you, yes.
So we did this study called Talent Wars, and there were a couple of myths that this helped to break. So one of the myths is that not a lot of people are looking for jobs, and not a lot of people are looking to relocate. And we did find that when we asked people how often they might look at a new job opportunity, 90% said several times per year. So it's on the radar screen of a lot of people. They're sort of constantly looking at how can I get a better job, how can I do something else, or how can I work for a different company. The other kind of myth that we would hear quite a bit is that millennials today will just move to a location and then get the job second. And in the surveying that we did, we found that to be not the case, in terms of probability that Alan talked about. It was more people were focused on get the job first. So the number one criteria for any new job was salary. The number two criteria was work-life balance. Number three was company benefits. Location was actually number 6 on that list. So some things that were very heavily tied to your pocketbook or your wallet were at the top of the list in terms of people considering new jobs, essentially. So those were a couple of things. We did one other thing separate from the talent wars that was really interesting. We did a little project, we called it To Catch a Coder. So basically we created a mythical person, and we had them reach out to 28 different organizations within communities that said on their website that they were focused on trying to help attract talent to that community. And we said, hi, I'm an IT professional, I specialize in this sort of thing. I'm interested in relocating to your community. And then we sat back and we waited. And we gave both a phone number, we gave an email address. We sat back and waited and saw what happened. You know the average time it took for a community to respond? The average time was never. Because 70% of the communities never responded. Only 30%, and it's not a huge sample, it's 28 communities, only 30% did come back and respond, and usually it was, gee, you should look at our website. There was one community, Springfield, Missouri, that sent a brilliant response. It was, here are the here are the companies in town that are looking for someone with your talents. Here's someone who relocated here recently that you could call up and talk to. They sort of gave him everything he needed to sort of pursue this. But the conclusion that we came up with is even communities or organizations that are saying we're focused on talent attraction, they really suck at it, with the exception of Springfield, Missouri. So it was kind of an interesting exercise to go through.
Are the people in Springfield talking to you at this point, since you sort of bait and switched them?
Well,
Did you
we said good things about them.
You sent them a consolation prize or something? So.
Well, I don't think it took a tremendous amount of time for them to respond, but it was a good exercise.
For the community people in the room, how many of you have talent attraction as one of your goals? So a bunch of you. Are you any good at it? I'm just asking. Good? Yeah, pretty good? Okay. Fair enough.
I won't out you if you were in our survey, but it was an interesting, telling example that we think that there's still something very powerful about a personal contact, and anytime I respond to anything, I hate filling out a form online, and I hate then getting that non-personalized response within like 3 seconds. I want someone to take the time to respond and try to address the questions that I brought up. And we found that, with one exception, the communities we approached didn't do that very well.
So Springfield's not a very big place, and my guess is you sent it to some big places. Is this an area you think smaller communities could have a competitive advantage in?
I haven't thought about that, but I think it's true. But I also want to go back to something that Alan said, that if I have a very specialized skill, there's safety in going to a big community where if that job I relocate for doesn't go so well, there are 10 other places I can go. If I don't have that safety, that's a problem. And the other thing that I would add to that is if I have a spouse or a significant other that's traveling with me, what is the job prospects for that person? That comes out in our survey as quite important as well.
And so we do a lot of cluster work, and we've always said that what makes clusters work is depth of marketplace. There might be a specialized center at a university, there might be some other things, but it's exactly what Alan described as depth of marketplace that allows clusters to dig in. We find a lot of communities, though, they don't want to be what they are, they want to be something else. So how do you brand to be new and different?
It's really hard to market something that doesn't exist, and I think people will tend to see through that very quickly. So it's certainly good to say we're going to focus in on these 7 target industries, and 2 of them are aspirational, and we're going to build towards them. But when you get down to marketing in terms of trying to attract companies or trying to attract people, they will see through that very, very quickly. And so it's a hard thing to do.
So if community is trying to get attention, if they're trying to get attention from companies and individuals, and you walk in day one, what's the first piece of advice you give them?
We try to figure out what differentiates them, and that's challenging. That's difficult. And I want to give you an example because I think it brings it to life. So we're working with Salinas, California. Anyone ever been to Salinas, California? Okay. Well, it's a lot. Okay, we must be doing good work. Wow. So in Salinas, they had marketed themselves forever as the salad bowl of America, really the salad bowl of the world. It's an agricultural community. They grow more lettuce than any other part of the country, and so that was their claim to fame. And they brought us into, they had recently lost their largest employer, and so we were sort of brought in as like a Hail Mary pass. And we said, basically, the salad bowl of America thing just ain't gonna work. We don't think that's a way to brand your community, but we think we can put a twist on it. So basically, we did a lot of interviews, we went around, we met with all the corporate executives, we met all sorts of different people in the community. And I forget the exact terminology we used, but basically the agricultural technology center of the world is sort of what we came up with. So Ag Tech Central was sort of what it was. I'm not using the exact words, but that was sort of the concept. And the first thing we did to get credibility behind that is Forbes was doing a Reinventing America conference. Some of you may be familiar with it or know about it. And we went to Forbes and we said, you know, would you consider doing a conference in Salinas that focused on ag tech? And they liked the idea, so they did it. They did it the first year and attracted 400 ag tech executives to come and see it. Forbes liked it so much that they did it again the next year. 500 people came. They did it again the next year. More people came. And so suddenly Salinas became the ag tech capital of the US. And it happens to work really well because it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Silicon Valley. So you have the Technology Center of America, the Ag Tech Center of America working closely together. And we were also able to get a lot of favorable media coverage about that, but it was an example of a community looking at itself closely and with a little bit of help from us trying to sort of figure out how to market themselves. That was the brand, and then the marketing part of it was effectively communicating that brand.
You want to weigh in on the millennial question that we've been batting around? As I walked out in between the break, all I got were millennial questions. Do we really think they're all the same? No, they're not. Do we really think there's some commonality? Yes, there is. Why do they really move? You want to jump in on it?
I work mostly with millennials, and our staff is very, very young, and and it may be that we've been good about selecting those that don't fit some of the negative characteristics that we hear about millennials, but you know, I see less of some of the negative traits that I'm hearing from others. So my view is sort of framed by the people that I work with on a day-to-day basis, and candidly, I just see them as less different than previous generations than what others probably in the room feel and sort of see. You're making an motion back there. An agreement or disagreement? Okay, well, there are two of us, so you can buy me a drink tonight, and I'll buy you a drink tonight as well. Okay, good.
I think Carl's buying the drinks, so it's okay. It's all right. It works pretty well. Yeah, and I agree with you completely. But it is a strange thing when we do groups that millennial issues always come up. Every community we're in, they want to talk about the problem, the solution, and it's all about millennials. And you know, I think that by and large they're just fascinated by them as a group. I don't find that there's any single thing that you could say about. They are more technological savvy, of course.
Yep.
They're more digitally connected. They tend to be a lot more interested in more different things. But I think they care about their communities just as much. And I think they're willing to roll their sleeves up and dig in as much as anybody else. How do we get them in leadership? How do you do? I know you have young leaders in your company.
So in community leadership, and given that where I work is in New York City, and that's like, you know, completely different model than everyone else in this room. I'm probably not the best person to ask that, but I think they do care about their communities. You know, it has been interesting to look at all around the country these YP groups popping up all around. And I guess one thing that I've seen is kind of like, and particularly within some older chambers of commerce, is they view the YP group as like the children's table at Thanksgiving. You know, we're gonna let these guys do their own little thing, and you know, but they're not really players here like we are. And at some point, you're going to have to accept them as players, and some communities have done that really well. A lot of communities haven't done that really well.
Do you think it makes a difference? When you go into communities, what role does leader? Can you tell immediately if the community has good leadership to do things or not? What role does leadership play?
Because a lot of our work is working with the economic development sector, we probably more work with the public sector leadership and also the private sector leadership. The public sector leadership is always challenging because, you know, there's frequently change every 4 years or every 8 years. It's really interesting to go into a community where the mayor has been there for 20 or 25 years, and there's a certain stability to that, which is a very, very good thing usually. On the private sector side, one of the things I'm observing is that, from my perspective, turnover happens more within private sector leadership today because people move to other places, and and they're not in the same community for 20 years or 25 years, and they go from job A to job B to job C, and so they're less interested in the community, or they're less willing to invest their time in that. And I think that's been difficult for a lot of communities to adapt to, trying to find new leadership.
Do you find, as the community people in the room, do you find that getting corporate leadership engagement is harder than it used to be or easier? Harder? Harder? And is it because they're transient or because they're busy?
I think well, for us, I think one, leadership's become disaggregated at the business level. So with you have a huge like steel corporation, the CEO is not based where we're based.
So part of it's just the restructuring corporate America.
And then I think it's what Alan was saying, of it's not necessarily inherently a part of their incentive to be a good corporate citizen or be engaged. So figuring out how to create that is a challenge for us.
Okay.
Carly, let's go ahead and pull the mic out. We'll get started with that. Yes, Carl.
So, a dimension to that, Andy might be able to talk about is branch towns versus headquarter towns. And what you see in the private sector is that, and a lot of us used to be headquarter towns. We are, but a lot of us no longer are headquarter towns, not anything like we used to.
Yeah, that's a tough nut to crack, Carl. So I think in a really successful effort, you may be able to get the attention and the time of the local plant manager or the person who reports back to the headquarters in Chicago or New York or Los Angeles. The challenge is it's really hard to get the money. And if you want corporate support, which is important to be able to do important things, it's much, much harder for that local plant manager or whoever directs that local facility to go back and say to Chicago, I need $100,000 to support this effort within my town. It's a much, much tougher sell, and a lot of times that person is also transitional. They've been working at the corporate headquarters for a while. Now they've been sent out to the field, but they know they're going to be going somewhere else, maybe back to the corporate office, maybe to another facility. And it's just, there's less incentive for them to fight for it the way they did. So you probably have to turn to whoever your local headquarters, locally headquartered companies are, and some of those are going to be much, much smaller and have fewer financial resources behind them. So I have no good solution, I'm afraid.
So let's do a question here, and then we'll go to the back.
Maybe a comment. Jerry Murphy, I'm with the Appleton Group. Our board leadership is the C-suite, and part of what I think is driving that is it's not, my organization is not a publicly hosted, it's a private sector group. So I don't think that they feel that they're as exposed to the public logic of you're making the right decision, you're making the wrong decision, or you're going in the right direction or wrong direction. The other point that I was going to make is across all of the economic development organizations that I'm aware of, the demand for a solution to labor and talent has got every corporate person that I know, at least in our neighborhood, is definitely engaged. And so it's a unique time in history, if you think of it that way, where whatever the prior drivers or motivations were for corporate America to get engaged, almost across the country, you've got corporate leaders that are very definitely involved in, because they are very, very largely vested interested in seeing something successful. And I think that happens at a corporate headquarters or a branch or a production facility if it's a major employer. I see our corporate crowd very much engaged.
With the unemployment rate at 4.3% now, you couldn't be more right. I just want to talk about something you brought up here. So talent attraction for micropolitan communities. It's tough. Let's talk about where we are here, Danville, Virginia. I did a little research before this, Carl, and there are 21 Danvilles in the United States. There's also one in Ontario, and there's one in South Africa. So there's a lot of other Danvilles out there, and it's hard to differentiate yourself. What I have counseled communities like yours, if you're going to focus on talent attraction, focus on trying to bring back people who grew up in your community or perhaps went to school in your community. You'll have much more success. So I was working with an economic developer in Iowa, a very small community, about 6,000 people. You know where he did his recruitment? He would go to senior citizen homes and senior citizen centers and basically talk to people and talk about, he'd find out, you know, which people had really successful sons and daughters that were living in other parts of the country, and could we successfully bring them back. So that was his talent attraction strategy.
The guilt?
I guess so.
That's the book.
My
right
poor-
there it
my
is.
poor
It's
mama,
the book for you. I don't know. I think somebody in the back has the mic, right? You're good? All right, up here. It's coming right at you. Yeah, it helps.
Hi, I'm Rob Briley from New Hampshire, and I just want to let you know that as a Gen Xer, I'm a slacker, I'm cynical, I'm disaffected, and I want my MTV. So, who's with me?
You can't have your MTV. The rest of it, okay. It's
I don't
fine.
know about even if it's still on anymore. Anyways, as a marketing guy, the thing that kind of, as we think about recruitment and attraction for young people coming back to northern New England, we think back into historical times. The Homestead Act, to me, was a big marketing program. Again, different times and thinking about agrarian society, but that was less about place and more about the opportunity.
Yep.
And I think about this conversation we're setting up here, where we have regions that are essentially competing with each other for people, with the exception of those that grew up there, have some emotional connection to that place, which I totally agree with, by the way. I'm curious about how we think about presenting rural or micropolitans or whatever en masse like we've done historically. Was that successful? Is it potentially successful? Is there a balance to be struck with both a larger national conversation around balancing our population, or do we really need to focus on unique, authentic, specific places and really hang our hat on that?
I think it's probably the latter. So I think the challenge is, you know, and I experience this in my own business. So my company is headquartered in New York City, and we work with a lot of millennials. So we attract a lot of people from the Midwest, frankly, who just have it in their mindset that I want to work in the big city. You know, I grew up in either a rural area or a suburban area, and I want to move to New York. I want to be in New York City. And I find about half of them get there and they absolutely love it and they never leave, and they're working in New York City for 20, 30 years. And about the other half, after about 3 years, they've had enough. And they're ready to go, in some cases go home, in some cases just go to some place that isn't the big city. You know, they're tired of sleeping on a futon for 3 years. And so I think you gotta tell that authentic story to that half that, you know, are ready to come back home or come back to a different sort of lifestyle. You know, the big city wasn't what they thought it was gonna be, or they got it out of their system. And so I think it's you know, finding that audience. It's just so much easier if that emotional connection already exists. And it's just a much easier sell than trying to present something that's completely new to someone.
So we're not going to see a new Got Milk that says, go find a life somewhere else. You know?
I don't think so.
You're the mark.
More questions? Michael in the back.
Take your time, Carly.
Hi, I'm Michael Goodman, Capital Broadcasting. So I think the interesting paradigm shift, this is actually leading to a question. It's about 10 minutes away, but it'll happen. The interesting paradigm shift, what I think is most uniquely illustrated through this Amazon nuttiness, is this concept that we as communities have one true currency, and that is the talent base and workforce quality of community we create. That's what we do. That's what we all invest in. That's what we invest in individually. That's what we invest in from a government perspective. And it used to be, more so, that's what we invested in from a corporate perspective. But somehow that dynamic changed to where communities began to pay people to harvest the talent that they paid to create, right? This notion of companies thinking, what do I owe my community for providing me such a great workforce, versus what does that community owe me for providing jobs? Right, that's an interesting dynamic that has changed over time, and I think, this is not a micropolitan conversation, but in the Triangle, it is very evident in a community which everybody says, oh my God, isn't that amazing with all the growth? We only have one Fortune 500 headquarters. One. Right? And at the end of the day, the death of corporate citizenship is significant in an area that is as robust in growth as the Triangle, and a lot of that is, I think, long-term because of this notion of what does a community owe me as a job creator versus what do I owe my community? And what I'm hoping you're going to say, with data to back it up and absolute certainty, that was a joke, is that you see that paradigm switching back because of what we've talked about. People need talent, they need workforce, they've got to find it out, and they can't go on an incentive hunt every time they need it. So do you think that paradigm will shift where companies will begin to change their mindset a little bit on how they invest into the community and the broader ecosystem around them?
That's a really good question, Michael. I don't see any evidence that that paradigm is shifting. I haven't really thought about the question before. I have to think more deeply about it, but at the moment, I think companies are so in the driver's seat in this case, because they do pit community A versus community B versus community C, and it's very hard for the mayor of community A to say, I got to stop here. We cannot give you this, $4 million incentive that you want here, because he or she wants those jobs so much. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Amazon, what stage 2 looks like, and but you're right. It's just sort of been a crazy time in that regard, and they just sort of turned the world upside down. I do fear that actually we may see the reverse of what you're talking about, because more companies may look, well, Amazon did this, and gee, it turned out pretty good for them. So we'll see what the end of the story looks like, but I don't see any evidence of that paradigm shift that you're talking about. So sorry to disappoint you. What do you see, Ted?
So I think that if Amazon is successful in what they did, which is create a bid war, that everybody's going to create a bid war. We have places in America, but mostly overseas, who already do housing real estate this way. They basically put their house up for auction, but they only do it in real desirable places, so that the asking price is the floor, and then you bid your way up, and so they get the highest bidder if you're in a desirable place. We don't tend to think about it that way. We're houses for $200,000. I'll offer $180 and see if they'll take it. It's sort of our model, but in other parts of the world, it's different. I think Amazon has. So first of all, you've got to be Amazon. You got to have 50,000 jobs at 150,000. I mean, so you're a big prize, but you create something different. I think the interesting question might be if talent is getting into the position of being able to drive this even more, because we're watching the top end of the talent market wages accelerate so fast that if you're a place that can attract talent, then you're in the driver's seat. And if you're a place that can't attract enough talent, you have to try and play a different game. And I'm wondering if the talent stuff, it might change faster. I don't see any evidence we're going the other way either. Curly, you got a bunch of them, so let's see how we do. Oh, that was just going to the closest one is not going. The two people up here get it next. Okay. Go.
Hey, I'm Grant Goins, city manager in Wilson, North Carolina, and I wanted to expand a little bit on what Michael was talking about. I think specifically you were referring to sort of corporate citizenship, and in a broader context, having spent the last 25 years as a city manager, I see the same thing happening with this citizenship. We have a Citizens Academy every year, and my first question to every class is, how many folks in the room are customers of the city of Wilson? Everybody raises their hand, and then you say, well, how many of you are citizens? And it sort of confuses them, because they do not know the difference between the definition of a citizen and a customer. And I believe that increasingly we are simply looked at from the customer perspective. And I don't blame that on millennials. I'm not going to jump on the millennial bandwagon, because I think all generations have now sort of fallen into that relationship. So that's more of an observation. It's one that concerns me. The definition of citizenship implies that you are part of a community chest and that you give and take and engage. I think as a country we're losing a lot of that. So it's not just the corporations. On the talent attraction piece, we're in a little bit of a unique situation. We're a micropolitan in a rural county, but we have a very large number of technology and high-skill jobs. Over 1,000 IT jobs at one employer alone. And what we're beginning to try to get working here is that look at the private and public sector working together in this question of talent attraction and retention, the mutual benefit of all those employees not commuting to Raleigh at the end of the workday and actually putting roots in the community. And I was wondering if you've seen any examples of where the private sector and the public sector have sort of worked together to work on this talent attraction for mutual benefit.
I think the best programs have been one in partnership with what you're talking about. And the way it has normally worked is for to get together the public sector or someone representing some sort of public-private entity leading the charge, but then getting the 8 to 12 largest employers in the community on board, putting in some money, and then the activity that they do together that sort of brings them, is real, is go on the road and basically have a job fair somewhere. So if we're gonna identify that for Wilson, North Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia is a great target market for us, let's take those 8 to 12 top companies, let's go with the public sector there, and let's have some sort of a job fair. Or it could be a reception where you can just meet the employers and go to people, once again, that have a connection to the community previously, as well as those who don't have a connection to the community, but invite them to come and look at what the opportunities are in Wilson. That has been the model that I've seen work pretty well. The private sector likes it because there's activity. They're actually meeting potential hires. They're getting face-to-face with people. And so I think that's been a good role model to work together. There also has been, we just did this in Cleveland County, North Carolina, as an example, a decision to build basically a jobs and a talent attraction website together. And once again, the private sector has put in a lot of the money and to basically build a talent portal. So those are the two things I've seen that have worked in communities. Anything you'd add to?
I was throwing Northwest Arkansas, which has some built-in advantages, but one of the things they do is the local governments use the private sector to poll its current employees, but also through its human resource department to find out why people will and will not move there, what the issues are, and then they try to align their capital campaigns to meet some of the areas that are weak. So they ended up with bike trails and a few other things that were a real problem for a while, and now they have one of the craziest bike systems you've ever seen in your life. It doesn't hurt that one of the Walton grandchildren's a cyclist, and that always helps, but they poll every year those HR people. And we've talked at Danville in our work here about if you want to know immediately where your strengths and weaknesses are, I tell people to go to the HR director at the hospital who's recruiting surgeons and nurses and everybody else and ask them why people turn them down. And you'll get a real good look at your community real quick.
My apologies for leaving my phone on, and I'm not a duck hunter if you're wondering that. Go ahead.
Hey Andy, I'm Chuck Shootman, and we didn't know whether to shoot the phone or
Chuck,
leave it alone.
You're from Tennessee, right?
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And if anybody'd like a job as a football coach, if you'll let me know, we can pass your name along.
If you're in charge of it, I wouldn't admit
Exactly.
it, but go ahead.
Exactly. No, actually, that's a pleasure.
Never
I
mind.
don't
Come on,
enjoy
go
Ted. A couple of questions about demographics and talent attraction that I would welcome your all's thoughts about. The first has to do with people my age and older who may be looking for something to do post-career. And are you seeing any organized efforts to attract workers who are transitioning from one career to another in communities as a part of enriching the workforce? And then secondly, speak to talent attraction, not just as an initiative to support community growth, but to support job retention within communities as work skills change, as the demographics change in the workforce.
Okay, let me take a stab at both of those. So your first one talked about sort of people going into a second act or a second career. I see no evidence of any community focusing on that. I have seen a small number of communities focus on retiree attraction. Mississippi did a lot of that at one point. Hattiesburg, Mississippi did a lot of that, but I see no evidence of anyone targeting that demographic. I think that's a really interesting idea. The second part of your question was in terms of
About work skills shifts as
Retention, yeah, work retention.
Got it. Okay. So I mentioned this Cleveland County example from North Carolina that we recently worked on. So there, while other communities have come to us and said, we need to attract IT jobs, we need to attract, office workers, they said, we see a huge problem in that our manufacturing workers are starting to retire. They're in their late 50s, early 60s, and who is going to take these jobs? And so their entire focus is focusing on trying to attract young individuals, 20s, 30s, who will be the next breed of manufacturing folks. In this case, it was kind of interesting. We, after looking at the demographics and the numbers, we counseled them. We said we think it's going to be pretty hard to get someone to move, 500 miles or 1,000 miles to Cleveland County, North Carolina. We think the better approach is to look in the immediate surrounding area of maybe a 100-mile radius or so, and to focus in on that audience, and to trying to get people to, in some cases, just change their commuting patterns. In some cases, it's a much shorter relocation within North Carolina.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, this is a great discussion. I'm Barbara Dyer from MIT, only recently with MIT, so a lot of this is sounding very familiar to me.
Do you have a book? Do you have a book at MIT? No.
Pardon? No, I have no book.
Okay.
Not a recent one. So this idea of a bidding war is not new. It's been around for more than a century, and
Yep.
even in some of the background materials that
Yep.
started, I think, in Mississippi with balanced industry with
Yep.
agriculture,
yeah.
right?
63, yeah.
So, and there are about 6 million firms in the U.S. economy, and only a very small percentage of them actually do move around. So the idea that they're all of these footloose firms just ready for a...
Yep.
So it's always astonishing to me that we spend so much time on attracting rather than building from within. And the same thing is true with talent. It's actually some recent data at a conference that a few of us attended that the Federal Reserve organized. It was astonishing how little mobility. Mobility is actually down on individuals moving from one place
About
to
in
another
half
job.
of what it used to be. Yeah.
And it is true that from the days of, as you talked about, America is built on lots of moving for opportunity. So that's, so the idea of place-based has saliency, but it's also, if you cast it in history. The other thing about all of this discussion is this sort of these halcyon days when companies were really strong, corporate citizens were that was a very short-lived period in the sort of history of business in America, and it happened because of a lot of pressure and so let's not paint too rosy a picture of all of this. And so the question is, what do we do? What do we do? And how do we begin to cultivate talent from within, cultivate the strength of companies that are already there, generate the kinds of ecosystems that would enable new businesses to form in place? There are certain things you can do to attract companies, but in some ways it seems like misplaced energy when there's so much that can be done.
So an observation, I already said that most communities suck at talent attraction. The majority of communities, I think, are not great at business retention as well. And it's hard. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the businesses themselves also play an important role. So the businesses themselves invest more than the public sector and all the foundations combined in talent cultivation, for example. And it's that interplay of business around things that are really specific to business that will enable businesses to stay.
That's too difficult for me to repeat everything, but
Okay.
I'll
Business also plays a role in talent attraction was the general, and so, yeah.
right. But I'm sticking with business retention for a moment. So a number of communities have, business retention program that says we're going to look at our larger employees and we're going to visit those employers every year and we're going to go see them. And a lot of communities just simply don't do that, or they pay lip service to that. I'll tell you what almost nobody does in America is, if you have, and this goes back to something, Carl, that you said, if you have a plant where the headquarters is somewhere else, almost no one goes to that headquarters location and meets with the CFO or the CEO in Chicago or in New York or in Los Angeles. And to me, that's really where the decision making is going. I remember we helped to set up we were working for the state of Pennsylvania at the time. We helped to set up a tour in Boston where they were just going to see companies that had operations in Pennsylvania but were headquartered in Boston. And they walked into their first appointment, and the CFO goes, "Well, I got something to tell you here. We have 8 plants around the country. We've decided we're going to shut down 3 of them. And we're pretty well decided that the one in Pennsylvania is going to get shut down." The local plant manager had no idea about that. So, but a good business retention program goes to meet with people within your community, but also goes on the road and meets with people at the corporate headquarters as well. So to me, that's I sort of went in a different direction on your comment or question there, but I think economic development organizations can get a lot better at business retention is just my observation from working with a lot of them.
The only thing I would add is that the whole idea of talent development, when we talk to communities and we ask who's responsible for workforce development or talent development, a lot of communities have a really hard time with that question. They'll either say, well, it's the community college, or, well, it's the whatever. And you run into, when you're talking about workforce issues, you run sort of into 2 streams immediately. One is the immediate, how do I deal with the fact that this plant A can't find machinists? And okay, you can figure out how somebody can train machinists. But then the second thing you run into is this systemic change of how do you ensure better early childhood education, and how do you ensure reading at 3rd level and early exposure to careers. And it's really hard. It's easy to get businesses to say that's important. It's really hard for a local business leader to want to put a ton of energy into that, knowing that that child, they'll be retired long before that child hits the workforce. And so you end up trying to get public and private involved in the systemic issues. But what's happened around America is those are hard. And so everybody just goes to the immediacy issues and, well, let's just set up a new training program, and that'll fix this for this company. And so it's an engagement issue, but along with mobility dynamism being reduced in America, we've also in recent years had some entrepreneurial dynamism be reduced. And it's really hard for communities to start making those choices. What we try to do, every community is different. Your businesses are different. So you've got to really look closely at the individual. That's why you do assessments as you go in.
I would just add that I think just in a lot of communities, they have concluded that workforce development hasn't worked, so we're going to now try talent attraction to add on top of that. And the jury is out whether that's going to work or not. But that is, I think, why a lot of communities are starting to focus on that.
I've been told one more, so who's got the mic? There we go.
My name is David Joyner. I'm from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. I own a marketing firm, Joyner Media and Strategies. I'm here at Capital Broadcasting, who we're fortunate to be able to work with.
A fellow marketer, good.
I have I wanted to thank you for explaining the difference between branding and marketing, because in a lot of smaller communities, especially I'll say in Eastern North Carolina, there is a lot of money being wasted on branding and marketing strategies that are usually driven by county commissioners whose idea of marketing and branding is to slack the name of the county on 50,000 billboards up and down the highway. And then there's usually not a real marketing plan in place, budget in place, staff person in place. The economic developers and tourism marketing people don't work together at all. So can you really, just take a minute to explain, why it's important to have an actual tactical plan in place and somebody designated to do that if you're really going to ever leverage the marketing of your area?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up, you're absolutely right. We see in a lot of communities, they will, the word branding has been sort of a hot buzzword for maybe 10 years now. And it does get associated with a logo or a brand mark. And, I've been in communities that have spent $250,000, $300,000 developing that brand mark. And then, everyone pats each other on the back and says, well, our brand is now done. So my argument has always been that, yes, you do have to have a brand mark that is professional, looks good, everyone can feel good about, but to spend $300,000 on that is absolutely crazy. But where you should be investing the money is in the second part of that, the marketing and the tactical side of it. And I'll go back to the line that you shared, the CAF Early Brands itself. It's sort of figuring out a creative, inventive way to get others to sell your community, which is going to have a much higher degree of credibility than trying to do it, frankly, through paid opportunities like print or broadcast or digital advertising. So hopefully that quickly connects with some of the thoughts you have.
One final question. I know you survey this regularly. When people are making site selection decisions or investment decisions, how often do they pay attention to print, advertising, those kind of things that people spend a lot of money on?
Sure. So we do a survey. In fact, I brought a couple of copies. So I have copies of the Talent War survey that we did, about 20 of them or so. And if we run out, I can mail you, or you can also download it on our website. I also have a copy that you're referring to called Winning Strategies in Economic Development and Marketing, where we survey every 3 years about 350 corporate executives with site selection responsibilities, and we ask them, where do you get your information about communities? What do you hear? How is your information generated? And the top 3 things consistently, since we've done this survey since 1996, the top 3 things haven't changed. Sometimes the order changes a little, but they're the same exact things. Number 1 is dialogue with industry peers. So it's, once again, that credible third party. So if I'm a CFO, what the CFO from another community or from another company is saying about me. So dialogue with industry peers, number 1. Number 2, articles in newspapers and magazines. That is the second most important thing. Number 3, business travel. What I observe when I'm in the community, on a business trip, or I'm going to a conference, something like that. For many of you that have never been to Danville before, your impressions of Danville are going to get formed over the next 2 days, and that's exactly what the survey tells us. So those are the top 3 things.
What's at the bottom?
What's at the bottom? Basically all paid media. So advertising is at the very bottom. Interestingly enough, social media comes up fairly low as well. So those 2 things sort of fall quite low in that regard.
Let's thank Andy for being with us.
Thank you all.